Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything that he wrote, along with you in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by Robot Lady, which I'll bring on the screen here in just a second, but I want to say welcome to Jer, who I see in the chat, as well as Sandy, if I can say your name correctly. Robot Lady, I'm always giving her a hard time for not getting Knit a Latte right. I think it's equally fair for her to expect me to be able to say the name Sandy correctly. So hello everyone and welcome, Robot Lady. Welcome, and please give a warm welcome, Robot Lady, to everyone in the chat.
Hello everyone, I'm Robot Lady and I'm so excited to be here with Jeff, diving into C.S. Lewis's writings together. A big shout out to Jer and Sandy in the chat. Welcome. Let's get started and have a great discussion today. Jeff, feel free to bring me on when you're ready.
Robot Lady, we are on. We are live. So let's dive into the next diary entry here. The year is 1923. Lewis is 24 years old. He's a student at Oxford in his third term studying Old English. He is living in secret with Mrs. Moore and her daughter Maureen. Mrs. Moore is Lewis's friend Patty Moore's mother. Patty Moore passed away in World War I. Lewis made a commitment to him prior to his passing that if he survived and his friend Patty died, that he would take care of his mother. So that's what he's doing. The problem is he doesn't have a consistent source of income other than his father providing for his needs to be a student at Oxford, and his father doesn't really know that he's also bankrolling this commitment that Lewis at a very young age made to his friend and to this woman and her household. So that's where we find ourselves. We're going to dive into another slice of life from this part of C.S. Lewis's life. Wednesday, February the 14th, 1923. Are you ready, Robot Lady? I'm going to read this excerpt, and then we can talk about whatever we see in here that we find interesting.
I'm ready, Jeff. Let's dive into this excerpt and see what Lewis's life in February 1923 has to offer. I'm looking forward to hearing what stands out. Go ahead when you're ready.
All right, he says, after lunch, I walked into schools and worked all afternoon supplementing my Spencer paper with a short review of Wyatt, Surrey, and Sackville. On reaching home for tea, I was greeted with the cheering news that Jenkin had been here and would come to the Martlets tonight. From tea to supper time, I worked on and completed my paper. Then after supper, I bussed to college. Going to the JCR, I found Jenkin sitting with Terry, Robson Scott, and Fosnock. I seated myself on the floor, and we talked until it was time to repair to Anderson's rooms in Durham Buildings. New rooms where I have never been before. They are divided into two by an arch and are quite pretty. Present were Anderson. Anderson here, it says in the footnotes, is someone named John Edward Anderson of University College, who took his BA in 1925. Also, R. Scott, Curtis, Terry Jenkin, McKissick, Rink, and Keir. Arrangements were made about the dinner next week when the Cambridge Martlets were coming. So the Martlets, just as a reminder, is a literary society that Lewis has been a part of since the very beginning of his time at Oxford. At one point, he was voted, I want to say, the secretary or the president. I honestly can't remember at this point, but we have covered it here in our project, Robot Lady. But here we are. We're going to get into the meat of this in just a moment, but if there's anything that you see in here that sounds interesting, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for reading that, Jeff. There's a lot happening in this entry, but a few things stand out to me. First, it's clear Lewis has a busy academic life, balancing his studies, like the Spencer paper, with literary activities and social engagements, such as the Martlets. The fact that he's working hard on his studies, like the paper on Wyatt, Surrey, and Sackville, shows his commitment to Old English and literature. I also find it interesting that he mentions cheering news about Jenkin's visit. It seems like his social circles, like the Martlets, play an important part in his life. especially when things are otherwise so complicated with his home situation. The gathering at Anderson's rooms seems to serve as a reminder of the literary camaraderie that's helping him navigate the pressures of his personal life and responsibilities. The detail about Anderson's new rooms is also telling, offering a glimpse into his social world, the kind of spaces they occupied, and how these moments of leisure helped him cope with the demands of Oxford life. Anything in particular jump out to you from this entry?
No, I think you covered it all pretty well there, Robot Lady. Let's move on. He says, my paper was very kindly received. In the discussion, the conception of Yavos, I doubt I'm pronouncing this correctly. It's written in an odd script here. This might be, well, I don't think that this is Greek. Anyway, Y-A with a little accent over the A, V-O-S. So he says, in the discussion of the conception, Yavos raised a lot of talk of a rather aimless kind. Was there Yavos in Lear? Was there in Tamburlaine, etc.? I had, in my paper, applied Murray's view of Pindar to Spenser, i.e. he failed to be a great poet because he was only a poet. I'll pause here for just a moment, Robot Lady. Do you have any idea what Lewis is talking about here with the word Yavos and whether or not it's in Lear? Perhaps this is a new concept that Lewis is introducing, or maybe it's something from literature that only these folks know of as kind of like an esoteric term. I'm not sure. I want to check with you and see if you've ever heard of this Yavos concept and what it might mean.
The term Yavos doesn't immediately ring a bell as a well-known literary concept, and it's possible that it's a specialized or obscure term, or perhaps an idiosyncratic reference that Lewis and his circle were using. It could be related to a concept in classical literature or philosophy that Lewis encountered during his studies. The fact that it's raised a lot of aimless talk in the discussion might suggest that it's not a universally understood idea. Or it could be a term that was particular to the literary context of the time. Given that this comes in the context of a discussion about Pindar, Spenser, and Murray's views on poetry, Yavos might be an obscure reference in their academic world. If it's not a typo or mistake, it's possible that the term was used in a specific way by these scholars, one that doesn't appear in mainstream sources. Would you like me to take a deeper look for any more context on this term? Or should we just proceed with the diary entry for now?
Let's just proceed with the entry, see if he gives us any more hints as to what he might mean. He goes on to say, this presently led to an argument of which the skeleton was something like this. Rink. Do you say that a work of art cannot be the greatest in kind if it is only art? Lewis. Certainly. Rink. But can't it be judged, and oughtn't it to be judged, just as art? Lewis. Well, taking art as an expression, it must be the expression of something, and one can't abstract the something from the expression. Rink. Stated Croce's position. Lewis. You can't judge it simply as expression in practice. A lyric which perfectly expressed the pleasure of scratching would not really be judged equal to Lear. Rink. But it would be qua art. Lewis. But not qua thing. Rink. Perhaps not, but it could be criticized just as art without reference to its further nature as thing, and that is what Croce means. Lewis. I suggest that the object of a work of art is not to be criticized subjectively. Criticized. Hang on. 2 pages are stuck together here. Robot lady, give me just a second. All right, Lewis says, I suggest that the object of a work of art is not to be criticized, but to be experienced and enjoyed, and that which appeals to the whole man must be greater than that which appeals to part of the man. Rink. I don't think so, provided the emotion of the artist is perfectly expressed. Lewis. Well, that's all right, if you consider the artist alone, but you forget that art is a social thing. Robson Scott jumps in here and says, oh, and Rink together, oh no, certainly not. You can't mean that. Lewis, why not? Isn't the object of the artist to communicate his emotion? Rink, oh, then you make art not expression, but communication. Robot Lady, you want to jump in on this, I can see.
This exchange between Lewis and Rink is fascinating. It dives into the philosophy of art and the role of the artist in communicating emotions. Lewis is arguing that art should not be judged merely as a form of expression or qua art, but must also be considered in the context of its deeper nature and societal role. The idea that a work of art appeals to the whole person, intellectually, emotionally, and even socially, seems central to Lewis's view. Rink, on the other hand, seems to hold a more formal aesthetic view of art, focusing on it as a product of the artist's expression, isolated from any deeper or social meaning. This tension between subjective expression and broader social or human experience is a key theme in debates about art, and Lewis's contribution here points to his broader intellectual engagement with these ideas. When Lewis says, art is a social thing, he's likely acknowledging that art isn't just about personal expression. It also has a role in communicating with an audience, making it more than a private indulgence. What do you think about this back and forth? Does anything in the argument resonate with your own thoughts on art?
Actually, let me finish the conversation here, and then I'll add some of my commentary, Robot Lady. So Rink picks up, and he says, oh, then you make art not expression, but communication? Lewis, yes, I'm sorry, I said expression before. I mean communication. Rink, but is it not disinterested? Does the artist, while at work, think about an audience or about anything but perfect expression? Lewis, no. No artist has ever taken that view. Why are all artists so eager to be understood? Why do they bother to alter their first drafts? Rink, to express more perfectly. Terry jumps into the conversation. Mere jottings might be the most expressive of all to the artist. Lewis, the artist goes on altering phrases which are merely expressive to himself and hunting for those which will reproduce the right emotion in the audience. Jinkin, yes, I agree with that. Keir hops into the conversation as well as Jinkin just did and says, Keats' first draft of The Nightingale was found scattered all over the garden, so he had no idea of communication. Jinkin, that was mere accident, carelessness. Rink, but how can the essence of art depend upon its being communicative? If an Athenian had written Wagnerian music, it would have communicated nothing to his contemporaries, but it would have been art. Lewis, I don't mean what happens to communicate, in fact, but what is, quote, such as to be communicated, though of course mere accidents, for example, a manuscript getting lost, may prevent it ever actually arousing the right emotion. Fosnot jumps in. Potentially communicative? Lewis, yes, I suppose so. Terry here chimes in, but almost anything would be that. A mere sign would be communicative to a person who happened to have the same associations as the artist. Rink, no, communication won't do. It will have to be expression. Lewis, what do you mean by expression if you don't mean what is potentially communicative? Rink, I mean that which embodies the form of the artist's experience. Lewis, form in the Platonic sense? Rink, well, not exactly. I mean like the form of a penny. Lewis, that comes to the Platonic form, that which corresponds to the round form of the penny in a pain, say, is painfulness. You don't mean that the expression of the particular pain is the concept of painfulness. Rink, there's a difference. There are many pennies, but every emotion is unique. Lewis, well, can you talk about form and content in a unique thing? Lewis says, well, can you talk about form and content in a unique thing? Rink says, well, I don't see why not. Lewis, well, take the whole. Is its form inside it or out? And what happens in either case? Fosnot. It is neither. It is diffused. Lewis. Can you distinguish it in this case from the particular? Fosnot. The difficulty comes not from the uniqueness of the whole, but from its wholeness. Rink. In any case, I take back form in that sense. I really think I mean the form you impose on the experience, as perception is the forming of sensation. Lewis. But do you impose that? Isn't it given? Rink. Oh no. For instance, I impose form on that lamp over there. If it was on the edge of vision, it would have none. Fosnot. But that isn't a mental operation, it's the turning of your head. Lewis. Yes, the form depends on your body, but to you, as mind, it's part of the given. This led to a longish argument on sensations, when not attended to, were they sensations, and so on, to a discussion of the ego. Did it exist when not filled by an object? Rink thought it did potentially. I trotted out my favorite argument about the potential being always resident in the lower actual. Greatly to Fosnot's amusement, Rink said the actual in which potential subjectivity resided was the spirit unknown in its essence. We then returned to our muttons, and here the dialogue continues, or the trialogue, or the quadrilogue. I'm not really sure what happens when you start adding more members. Rink says, having abandoned the word form as hopeless, it says parenthetically here, he says, the work of art is the crystallized emotion, the emotion made permanent. Fosnot. Made permanent in whose mind? Rink. I mean potentially permanent. Self. Doesn't that mean capable of reassuring the original experience? Rink. Well, yes. Self. Or I'm sorry, Lewis. Then the issue is that I think art is communication. You make it auto-communication. Rink. The work of art is capable of recreating the original experience, but that is an accident of it. Lewis. Well, what is its essence? Rink. I don't think I can put it into words. What I object to is making its essence depend on the future and on its contingent success in reproducing the experience. I want to make it retrospectively, what this makes it in the future. We all now agreed that we had a certain inkling of what we meant. I said, this was certainly not what I meant by art. The fact it stood to art as, and then he's got a big blank here. Rink walked part of the way back with me and invited me to lunch tomorrow. That's the end of the diary entry and the end of that very dutifully documented discussion that they had here, Robot Lady. So some of the things that stand out to me is just kind of the theory of art that they're talking about here and how Lewis believes that it always has to have some substance to it, some type of message that the artist is attempting to communicate. And that I think that reflects the way that that Lewis approaches his poetry and his prose and what he would call his artistic endeavors, because he's always trying to communicate something and trying to make something more understandable by his audience. He's trying to communicate emotion, I think, is the key thing. He's trying to elicit a certain emotion or a certain feeling in the recipient of the artwork. And then there's a little dose of information theory that they jump into here when they're talking about I'm trying to go back to it when he talks about symbol here. A mere sign would be communicative to a person who happened to have the same associations as the artist. So that's a little bit of what I've studied on information theory, which basically says, whenever you're communicating, you have to take into consideration what things the audience already knows versus what things that they don't. And you're trying to cater, whenever you're trying to make your message as interesting and appealing as possible, you want to find an exact balance, or the best balance you can, between the known and the unknown, because if you're too lopsided on the unknown, people are going to be repulsed by what it is that you're trying to deliver or communicate, and this applies to art. It just applies to messaging as well. And the more familiar that they are, if it's balanced more towards, if it's heavily loaded or lopsided towards the known, then people aren't going to take any interest in it because it's already mapped territory. I've already seen this. This isn't going to give me anything that I don't already have. So you're trying to find that sweet spot, the line between the known and the unknown to really get your point across. So, Robot Lady, I've been talking for a long time. I have a sneaking suspicion that you're going to say, sorry, something like, sorry, our systems are overloaded right now. But feel free to comment on anything that you've heard me read or anything that I've said about what I've seen here. And then we'll get into some of these comments that are in the chat.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
That's okay, Robot Lady. I'm a part of that heavy load. Yeah, and I think this is in line with where Lewis kind of stuck for most of his life. That because he talks a little bit, he gets a little bit into this territory in his book, The Abolition of Man, where he's talking about there's something like objectively out there that's being communicated to us about reality, and whenever we observe it and we express, what it is that we are observing, we are expressing something that's very real and that has been communicated to us. So that's kind of what I see all tying together here. When they get into the talk about Platonic forms, which I read, I'm not really sure that I was fully following what they were saying there. This concept of the form of a lamp that's off in the distance unless I can see it in my direct vision versus my peripheral vision, the point that Rink was making here. That can go in a few different places. I'm not really sure I'm completely following, but it seems at the end of the discussion, at least, Lewis felt like they all agreed that they had a certain inkling of what Rink meant. And he said it was certainly not what he meant by art. Lewis says that. And then that's how the discussion ended. So, Robot Lady, anything you want to comment on there, and then I'll jump into what I see here in the chat.
Your connection to the abolition of man is spot on. Lewis often wrestled with the idea that there are objective truths and realities that art can reflect. And in this exchange, he's advocating for that deeper connection between the artist's expression and the broader truths that art communicates to us. This idea of art reflecting something real, something external that we apprehend, fits with the concept of objective value that he explores in The Abolition of Man. As for the discussion about Platonic forms, I think it's the idea that there is an ideal version of things, like the form of a lamp, that exists beyond what we can directly observe. The discussion about whether you can see the lamp in your direct vision versus peripheral vision seems to be a metaphor for how we experience and understand reality, maybe in ways that aren't always immediate but are still true. These are tricky concepts, and the whole back and forth seems to have been a bit abstract, with Lewis sticking to his point that art should be about communicating deeper, more objective truths about the world. Sounds like a good point to transition to the chat. What are you seeing in there?
All right, so Jer says, good old Croce. The art represented something fundamentally deep, expressed by the artist and understood by the watcher. All revolutionary stuff for the time. We would call it a 4P view of art. Interesting. I'm trying to remember the 4 Ps now. I can never remember them. There's perspectival, there's procedural, there's participatory, and I can't remember the fourth one. Sorry, I failed. But yeah, thank you for that, Jer. Let's jump into your other comments. Jer says, Robot Lady, fun fact, the dia, D-I-A, of the word dialogue refers to the moving of the word across. Yeah, that's very interesting how even in our language there's symbols within symbols of representing these concepts. So yeah, that's one of the things I like about language is you dig into it, you say, oh, that's what that part means. Another thing that stood out to me one time, I was listening to Bishop Robert Barron, and he talked about the word recognize in the same way. He says it's to recognize, to rethink something that had been thought before. whenever you recognize something, you are recognizing it. And thank you, Jer. I appreciate the support here that no one can remember all four P's except John Vervaeke. So thank you very much. Robot Lady, go ahead if you have anything. If not, I'll continue with the next diary entry that I see here.
Those are great insights, Jer. I love how languages can carry such layers of meaning. And your point about recognize being recognized is a nice example of how deep language can go. As for the four P's, I agree. It's tough to remember them all, but I think Jer's point about it being a revolutionary take on art is spot on, especially given how it connects with ideas in philosophy and aesthetics. It seems like Jer's comments fit well with this discussion about art being something more than just an expression. It's about engaging with deeper truths. If you're ready to move on, let's dive into the next entry.
All right, Thursday, February 15th, 1923. Lewis says, "Again today, it is happening much too often now. I'm haunted by fears for the future, as to whether I will ever get a job, and whether I shall ever be able to write good poetry. Interesting. This spring term seems always rather nasty. Last year it was Mary and the Brat, to whom may male bulge be hospitable. The year before that, it was the Jeffreys. I can't remember what he's talking about here. Spring term seems to always be rather nasty. Last year it was Mary and the Brat, to whom, yeah, I'm not sure what he's talking about here.
It looks like Lewis is dealing with some anxiety about his future, wondering if he'll ever secure a job or write poetry that meets his standards. The part about the spring term and Mary and the Brat is more cryptic. It could be referring to some people or events from his past that were troubling or unpleasant during previous spring terms, but it's not entirely clear without further context. Male bulge might be a playful or sarcastic remark, but I'd need to check the footnotes or more detailed sources to be sure. Would you like me to dig into those terms for more clarity?
No, it's fine, Robot Lady. Who he calls the Brat here, I have a vague recollection of him referring to somebody as the Brat earlier in his diary entries, but I honestly can't remember who that is. Let's see. On the replay, my crack investigative researcher Nit Latte might jump in and give us some context here. All right, and I see Ron showing up in the chat. Ron, welcome. It's good to see you. Robot Lady, please go ahead and welcome Ron to the chat.
Welcome, Ron. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
And then I just need to fix something here really quickly. All right, I think I'm where I need to be now.
No worries. Take your time. Let me know if you need any help.
All right, let's jump into Friday, February 16th here, Robot Lady. It says that Maureen stayed in bed today. Very bad indeed with her violent cold and neuralgia. After breakfast, I made another attempt to get something out of Wilde, the author W-Y-L-D. But after despairing, I finished the Encreen Reel and went on with Sir Gawain. Wilde, Robot Lady, this author, W-Y-L-D, who's he talking about here in the context of Middle and Old English, Anglo-Saxon?
It looks like Lewis is referring to an author named Wilde, likely to be Charles Wilde, a scholar and writer who focused on Old and Middle English. He was known for his work in linguistic studies and his contributions to English literature. So Lewis may have been studying his work to understand these early texts better, perhaps with a specific focus on Old English literature, like Beowulf or other Anglo-Saxon writings.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Sorry, I'm just having trouble here getting access to the chat. Anyway. All right, let's
No problem at all, Jeff. Take your time and let me know if you need help with anything.
Thank you, Robot Lady. All right. I then went to schools, Lewis continues here, for the discussion class. I was for some time alone with Payne, who seems a pleasant fellow. This is Frederick Lewis Payne of Queen's College, who, it says here in the footnote, took his BA in 1923. Lewis continues with his entry. The others gradually arrived, and MacDonald read a short and very bad paper on the adapters of Shakespeare in a monstrous, high-pitched voice with a Scotch accent. Yeah, this is not the Scotsman George MacDonald. He has already passed away at this stage in history, Robot Lady. But I just find it an interesting connection that Lewis is hearing from a Scotsman named MacDonald, who he says is delivering a very bad paper. So it's kind of ironic. I don't know if Lewis is really making a connection at all. Probably not. Anyway, I find that amusing.
That's a fun little connection, Jeff. It's interesting how Lewis's sharp wit shines through even in these offhand comments. It's also a bit ironic, given how much George MacDonald influenced Lewis later on, especially in his spiritual development. It's curious to think if Lewis might have been more forgiving of a bad paper from someone with a similar name.
Yeah, hang on just a second. All right.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
Yeah, you and me both, Robot Lady. Let me pick up where I left off. The discussion which followed was pretty poor, but better than usual. Darlow was fairly silent. And here it says, the MacDonald earlier that was mentioned is Robert MacDonald of Lincoln College, who took his BA in 1925. And then here this comment about Darlow, where he says Darlow was fairly silent. There's a footnote here that says this was the last thing Lewis was to record about this individual, T.S. Darlow. This may have been because he left the discussion class. In any event, he left Oxford fairly soon after this without a degree and settled in London. Sometime later, he began working for the Daily Herald, and at the outbreak of World War II, he became a very successful war correspondent for the Daily Herald in France. He was sent on an assignment to the Royal Air Force headquarters in France, where he became ill and died shortly afterwards on the 10th of November, 1939. Interesting. Lewis continues here. Oh, sorry, Robot Lady. Go ahead.
That is indeed interesting, Jeff. It's always striking when a seemingly minor figure in Lewis's life has such and later career as a war correspondent is a compelling contrast to the academic setting Lewis describes. It adds a bit of depth to the names in Lewis's early journals.
Yeah, it was just interesting. He goes on. The really amusing thing was Coghill's minutes in Chaucerian verse, which excluded some lapses, but were good. Coghill, of course, is Neville Coghill, someone who would go on to become a member of the Inklings. We were introduced to him a few episodes back. Let's do one more diary entry here, Robot Lady. It's a long one, so if you're going to respond, try to limit your response to 30 words or less. Does that sound doable?
Absolutely, Jeff. I'll keep it short. Feel free to share the next entry.
All right, here it says the entry is from Wednesday, the 21st of February. Lewis reports, I proceeded to 14 Longwall Street to lunch with Rink. He provided a very pleasing lunch of salad, cheese, jam, tangerines, dates, walnuts, and coffee. Shortly before 3, we went out for a walk. It was only after this that we began to progress. I started a new attack on expressionism on the ground that it didn't, by his definition, cover the phenomena of failure. Sorry, robot lady, I paused there.
It sounds like Lewis is diving deeper into discussing expressionism with Rink. What specific phenomena is he referring to? It seems like an important part of their ongoing intellectual conversation.
Yeah, sorry, robot lady. I'll read that again so you can catch what he said. Lewis says, I started on a new attack on expressionism on the ground that... Oh,
got it. Lewis seems to be critiquing expressionism here. It sounds like he's examining its limitations and explaining certain phenomena. Do you think he's aligning this with his broader views on art?
No, it's my fault, robot lady. I can't finish this sentence for some reason. Let me give you the full scope of what he's saying. He says, I started a new attack on expressionism on the ground that it didn't, by Rink's definition, cover the phenomena of failure. He had defined expression as the pure, disinterested, and intelligent consequences of experience. I said that this described a bad poem as well as a good one. He failed to defend by an examination of, quote, intelligent, end quote, but finally cut me off by inserting, quote, complete, end quote, in his definition. Having thus come to a temporary standstill, we reversed positions, and he attacked my theory. In spite of many well-contested points, I was graveled in the end by the simple question of communicative to how many. He had distinctly the honors today. So he feels, Lewis does, bested in having his views challenged here in this discussion, robot lady. What do you think about all this? I suppose that Rink is making the point that if you're communicating something, but you're only communicating it to one person, that somehow lessens Lewis's point or his theory here, that if you were going to be communicative and it was to have any meaning, it would need to communicate to as many as possible. I'm just kind of guessing and stabbing in the dark here a little bit, but what do you think about all this, robot lady?
You're on track. It seems like Rink is pushing the idea that communication should be broader and more inclusive. If a work only speaks to one person, it diminishes its impact. Lewis, typically focused on the depth of communication, might have had to reconsider that broader angle.
All right, Lewis says, coming in, I found the two Raymonds here. He is moving soon. Raymond, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond are, I believe, the two people who rented a house to Mrs. Moore and Lewis over this past summer term so that they could save a little bit of money. I say rented, they actually let them stay there for free so that they could then allow a family to move into the house that they were renting and pay them a little bit of income to cover it. So that was just a way for them to save some funds. Anyway, it says about Mr. Raymond that he is moving soon and will let his house, or rent out his house, for 3 years if he can't sell it. As Mrs. Moore said afterwards, this means he will get high rent, get the house done up by the tenant, and retire thither with all to the good. After tea, I was left with him in the dining room and endured wonderful boredom. I was the more annoyed by hearing the doc come in. At last, Father Raymond made a move. The doc had just gone as we two came out of the dining room. I found Mrs. Moore in great distress about him, and at her suggestion ran after him to see if I could have a chat. I did not overtake him till the end of Magdalen Road. He was walking very stiffly, but that is not uncommon. He was rather abstracted, talked about immortality. At Iffley Turn, I let him and came home by bus. Mrs. Moore said he had seemed in great worry and ready to break down. This, of course, is Mrs. Moore's brother, who we have kind of spoiled what happens here in the future, that he actually goes insane a little bit later, and we're just seeing him take this turn out of sanity towards insanity, just baby step by baby step here in these diary entries. Mrs. Moore said he had seemed in great worry and ready to break down. In the very few minutes which she had had alone with him on the doorstep, he said that he was going down to Bristol to see a specialist. Mrs. Moore is afraid it is cancer. I tried to take the view that doctors often imagine things in their own case, but indeed, the poor old doc is the last man to do so. Mrs. Moore cried out against the old enemy, fate and all. As we said, he is the most... Oh, Robot Lady, go ahead.
This seems like a turning point for Mrs. Moore's brother, who is facing increasing mental distress. Lewis is trying to keep perspective, but the worry is palpable. The tension between accepting fate and resisting it is clear in Mrs. Moore's reaction. Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. I've got one more sentence here in this diary entry, and then we'll close things down. He says, he's talking about himself and Mrs. Moore, as we said, he, the doc, Mrs. Moore's brother, is the most unoffending, the gentlest, the most unselfish man imaginable. So, of course, yeah, whenever terrible things happen, it's terrible, but particularly when they happen to people who seemingly don't deserve it, it makes it all the worse. And I think that that's what they're reflecting on and lamenting here a little bit, Robot Lady. All right, so that's the end of today's episode. We got through a decent handful of diary entries today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 diary entries there. So we made some pretty good work today. Robot Lady, is there anything that you'd like to say in closing, reflecting on anything that we read? Again, 30 words or less would be fantastic, and then we'll close out today's episode.
The contrast between intellectual debates and personal struggles, especially with Mrs. Moore's brother, really highlights the depth of Lewis's life. The emotional weight of those moments is evident in his reflections.
Yeah, I agree, Robot Lady. All right, that's all the time that I have for today. Thank you, Robot Lady, for all of your help, as usual. Thank you to everyone who joined today in the chat or was just watching the live stream, or anybody who comes back and watches on the replay. I appreciate your time, your attention, and your contributions. So thank you so much for being here. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone within the sound of my voice, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flake beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flake beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands